I would like to welcome everybody to this webinar. My name is James McKearns. I'm a network facilitator for ISSD Africa. And you're all very welcome to today's webinar, which the title of you see in front of you is Transforming Seed Marketing Lessons from Ethiopia. Now, although this is more styled as an ISSD Africa webinar, we're really happy to be organizing today's session in collaboration with some really close partners, close members of our community. We'll hear from the CIGAR Research Program on Policies, Institutions and Markets, led by IFPRI. We're very happy to have the Ethiopian Agricultural Transformation Agency, or ATA, here with us today. And of course, our friends or family members from ISSD Ethiopia. Today's session will last for about an hour and a half. These things are a little bit give and take. We can see how the discussion goes, and I'm sure it'll be a lively discussion. After a very short welcome and some introductions, also setting the scene, giving the context to today's session, we have three very interesting speaker presentations, which you'll hear more about in a moment. This will be followed by a panel discussion. Many of you in the audience have already submitted some questions to really frame this discussion, and we've also amongst the team prepared some prompts on which we can have a really useful and interesting discussion. And after that, we will close the session. We can't guarantee that we'll get to every single question that you in the audience might have, but please do type them in the chat. We will try to ensure that every question is answered after the webinar with the answers posted on the website. A little bit of the rules of the game for today. Only the panelists have microphones and cameras enabled. Everybody else, your contribution is very welcome in the chat. And this can be about the content of what you're hearing or any technical questions you have about engaging, about using Zoom. A little word of advice or recommendation. In the toolbar you have to control your view, there is an option called side-by-side mode. And this is nice for having a good look at the panelists' faces, but also seeing the slides. I'd like to just spend a minute just to introduce the ISSD Africa community of practice. Many of you are familiar with us already, but nonetheless, there are, I know, a few new faces and names in the audience. This is the third phase of ISSD Africa, and it runs for 3 years, with action research in at least 12 countries. Now, our activities really revolve around diverse forms of action research, really geared at solving African seed sector challenges of real continental importance. Now, we really want to be, a true community of practice. We want to give partners the space and the visibility to achieve new aims, reach new levels, and achieve new targets. To do this, we have diverse and complementary sources of funding. We have a dynamic structure with real shared leadership, shared decision-making responsibilities. And really with ISSD Africa, we're looking at what works under what conditions and what can be taken to scale and how best to do that. Now, for this, we have a structure which really encourages co-creation, exchange, and joint experimentation. And we really put a lot of emphasis on how best to embed what is learned in with government projects, programs, and different initiatives. Our community is built around 8 different topics, and here you can also see the organizations who play a leading role in facilitating those topics. Today's topic is really focused on the 4th topic you see there, enabling seed policies. And with that, I'd like to hand over to the topic lead, Dr. David Spielman, who will give a little bit of the context and background. And David, a reminder to unmute. There you go.
All right. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you very well.
Very well. Well, I'm coming to you from Kigali, Rwanda, where it's rainy season and the rain is pouring down. So if there's any ambient noise in the background, my apologies. So welcome everyone to this seminar. Public policy greatly influences the production, the quality, and the use of improved varieties and seeds by smallholder farmers throughout Africa, south of the Sahara. Sometimes we just forget how important policy really is as an enabler of technological change, entrepreneurship, innovation, and what we're talking about today, seed market growth and development. You know, in recognition of this fact, many countries in sub-Saharan Africa have actually worked to develop and revise the policy regimes they host that govern their seed sectors and industries. A handful of countries in the region have adopted some very far-reaching reforms over the last 10 years or so. Countries such as Kenya, Uganda, Zambia, Ghana, and the subject of today's webinar, Ethiopia. The design and implementation of policy reforms require a lot of careful consideration of available data analysis and evidence. And that's why ISSD maintains a focus on public policy issues. ISSD's work on enabling policies for seed systems development aims to examine gaps in the design and implementation of national seed policies that govern seed systems and their impact. It aims to design strategies to support national policies to incorporate and benefit from national, regional, and international agreements, networks, and initiatives. And it aims to identify and test innovative mechanisms that accelerate seed systems innovation, knowledge transfers, and public-private partnerships. Across the board, Ethiopia offers us an interesting case in point. And today's webinar provides, I think, an exciting opportunity to really understand how Ethiopia is navigating a policy reform process that directly targets its seed system. It also provides us with a chance to examine some of the measurable and objectively verifiable impacts of that process. And these are impacts that I think often when we talk about seed system reforms are actually not measured, but simply assumed. So today we start digging into those real impacts from an objectively verifiable perspective. This webinar should be a signal to those of us working on seed systems development in other countries and contexts where the question is fundamentally about how to balance the role of the public and private sectors and how that balance is so central to the agricultural transformation process. It should also be a signal to us about how important evidence is in the agricultural transformation process and in seed systems development. Keep those 2 points in mind as we proceed, because these questions are at the heart of our work in the policy component of ISSD. This webinar is one in a series of action learning and knowledge sharing activities that we are designing and holding to influence public policy formulation and implementation on seed systems and seed market development. So without going on and ad nauseum and talking about a subject that is very near and dear to my own heart, I want to turn it over back to our moderator and our chairperson of the session. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you very much, David, for really setting the scene there. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Dr. David Olemu. David is the chair of the National Seed Advisory Group, and of course, the manager for the bilateral Ethiopia-Netherlands effort on food, income, and trade, a good colleague and friend. David is really going to be the moderator for the presentations and follow-on panel discussion. David, without further ado, welcome. Nice to have you here, and please take us forward.
Thank you, James. I would like to welcome all panelists and also participants who have registered to attend this webinar. As it was indicated, it is a forum where we will try to exchange experiences in transforming the seed marketing system in Ethiopia. We have, as you are indicated, we have 3 panelists who will be talking to us, taking short time. The first one will be Dr. Mohammed Hassana, who will be taking and giving us a bit of historical evolution, how the seed marketing has been evolving through ISSD support, which will be Dr. Mohammed Hassana is an agricultural economist working for ISSD Ethiopia, which is one of the programs under benefits that I am managing. The second speaker will be Dr. Itbarak Simane, who works for ATA, the Agricultural Transformation Agency, highly engaged in the seed sector, but also in other inputs, agricultural inputs as a director. The final speaker will be Dr. Dawit Makonnen, who is working for IFPRI, and he will be talking about the impact that has been accorded following the seed marketing system changes, specifically on direct seed marketing. That is a focus of discussion. I think with this remark, let me kindly invite Dr. Mohammed Hassana to give us his 10 minutes short presentation, and then we will follow to the other speaker. Thank you. Mohammed, over to you.
Thank you, Dawit, and welcome everybody to this webinar. I'm here to present how we have facilitated the change of seed marketing in Ethiopia. James, maybe next slide. And to give you some background, probably a milestone about the seed sector of Ethiopia. The formal seed system was somehow established or started in 1979. And it was the establishment of Ethiopian Seed Corporation as part of the state farm, and that is to supply seed to the state farmers. And at this moment, you need to also probably remind that Ethiopia was following the socialist ideology since 1974. So that is the purpose of establishment. And the other milestone is actually the expansion of extension program in 1990s, very huge extension program, which probably took something like 10 years or more. That is very big one, and that has created a lot of demand for seed. That is one big milestone, and normally almost seed become part of the extension program, where even the producers were also considered as outgrowers for the government in general. And this is also partly because the production of seed was also relatively low, not more than 24,000 tons. But in 2011, the production has doubled, or more or less, probably compared to 2009. And probably can you proceed, please? Yeah, with this graph, you can already see how the trend of seed production is going, particularly towards the end, like 2008, 9, 10, and 11. It's sharply increasing, and 2011 is almost double of 2009. But the problem, continue, James, the problem with this thing is that as the seed production increases, the system of seed distribution remains the same. That is through the extension program. If you can see this diagram there, what I put there is how the seed demand is estimated, starting from the farmers. It had to go to the village, the district, the zones, the regional states, and the ministry. So the demand has to be assessed that way. And again, the ministry and the Bureau of Agriculture has to actually source the seed from the producers and then allocate the seed to each district, and then they has to facilitate the process of delivery of seed. So that all resulted in untimely delivery of seed in Ethiopia, making a major challenge. And at the same time, there is a mismatch between what farmers are expecting and what the government is supplying through this extension process. So at the end, there is a lot of carryover of seed, regardless of the small amount of seed produced in the country. But maybe the major problem lies on the assumption that this is the only way to distribute the seed in Ethiopia. That may be the major challenge, James. With that challenge, we have in 2010, at the end of 2010, we have introduced the idea of directly marketing seed. You can see the chart in the right side is very simple one, where the producers has to only communicate to their agent and farmers, while the right side with the left side, which is the distribution system, is very much complicated. So we have introduced this idea in end of 2010, which is very simple. And the major question is then how we able to change this. This system has been changed over the last 1 decade. Dr. Yitbarak will be presenting the number of waradas, how everything has gone over. So by this year, almost about 67% of the seed was distributed through this system, and it covers about 320 districts that Dr. Itwarak will give you the details. But how we came up to this change, that's a major question. Probably we have to look, James. And what we have done is we used what we call multi-level perspective of transition management, where we try to manage the change system at 3 different levels. One is at the level of introducing the innovation, the niche at the lower level, where we introduce the idea and also trying to expand that. That's one idea. That's one area of managing the change process or the transition process. The second one is we also try to work on changing the operational system. And ATA in particular has done in terms of scaling up, that is about changing the operational system of distribution system to seed marketing. And finally, we also worked at the socio-technical level, or the landscape level, where we try to change the policy. So we have played at these 3 levels to change the seed distribution to seed marketing, James. So the first thing that we have done is about building an advocacy coalition around the seed sector. This we have done actually at the regional state levels, not at the federal level, but at regional state level, where we have established what we call regional seed core groups. This is groups with actors in the seed sector. So the role of these actors at the regional level is to discuss about the systemic problems in the seed sector and also find a solution for these problems. And one of the problems was access to seed, but there are also other problems like access to EGS, quality seed, and all those things are also a problem. But access to seed is one of the problems. But what also makes this problem unique is that there is different perception among these actors, among the core group members, about the cause of this particular problem. James. So the thing is that we in 2011, 2012, 13, we worked more of introducing the concept. That's where we have worked. This is we introduced the needs, the innovations. We worked very hard on that type of introducing the idea. And then in 2014, 88 took over in terms of scaling up. That Dr. Itabarak will give you the detail. So you can see the trend of increase in number of districts over the years from 2011 to 2020. And you probably see the trend has changed a bit in 2018. And this is mainly because it's also about like we made an agreement with Agricultural Growth Program. And this program focused on high potential areas. So the idea is to include all districts in high potential area in the DSM. So that has changed the course of the rate of growth of this. And so this is how we have tried to change the operational system. And probably at 2017, we have already passed the critical mass that we were looking for. So that is one area of change. James? Yeah, the other thing is that we have to also play at the policy level. In fact, there is no policy that prohibits seed marketing in Ethiopia, even at that time. But there is a perception, there is a resistance to that because many consider this is not the direction of government. So we have to also work at the policy level to change that perception by also making a directive or regulation available for users. So ATA has started drafting the directive of seed marketing in 2017, but the approval of this directive has to wait for opportunities of windows of opportunity, because probably 2017 was not the right time for the approval of this. So James? So probably from the theoretical concept of a multiple stream model, you can see that these problems, policies, and politics always exist. But when the policy change is when these 3 streams meet somehow. That's what we call the policy window. So for us, a policy window was opened somewhere in 2018, where the political turmoil in Ethiopia, which started in somewhere in 2016, 17, culminated somewhere in changes of political leadership in 2018. and probably the change, particularly in the Ministry of Agriculture, has given us a chance that these people start listening to the advice of different actors on policy changes. And like individually, ATA was pushing for it, and we have also a coalition, what we call National Seed Advisory Group, who are always pushing for this change. And this push helped us to change to get the directive approved in 2019. So it is about what we have then done is we have played role at 3 levels to change the marketing distribution to seed marketing. I think that's what I have for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed, for timely finishing. Now we will proceed to the next panelist, Dr. Itbarak.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Dawit, and thank you everyone for having me. And I would like to share you the experience of DSM over 7-8 years. So the next slide, please. This is just the background of DSM. As Mohammed said, it was introduced in 2011 at 2 districts in Amhara region through the facilitation of ISSD and that time the Bureau of Agriculture, and until 2013, it covers up to 33 waradas. And then ATA commissioned IFPRI to understand the performance of DSM in these 33 waradas. And based on the learning, it was redesigned in 2014. So by that, we include Tigray region, as well as we try to include more crops than we had in 2013. And in 2020, that was last year, it was expanded to 320 waradas and include more than 10 crops. The next slide, please. This is part of the result of DSM over the years. On your left side, upper bar graphs tells you the number of waradas engaged in DSM over the years. And on your left side, on your right side, the aggregated number of waradas participating DSM over since 2013. And the bottom bar shows you the number of agents that contributed in retailing seed to farmers. So we start from 124 in 2013 and reach to over 1,600 agents. The next one, please. In 2020, we had 53 seed producers participating in direct seed marketing. 4 of them are public and 26 private and 23 are union. And that means 43% of the producers were unions and 49% of them are private. On the other hand, if you see the marketing agents, 67% of them are still cooperatives and the remaining are private agents. Next one, please. And the first top bars, I trying to show you the proportion of seed producers engaged in the marketing as well as their market share. For instance, in Oromia, we had 10% of the seed producers were public, and they cover about 72% of the market. On the other hand, 30% of the privates in Oromia cover only 20% of the market. And likewise, 60% of the unions had only 8% of the market. So the aggregated figure of the 4 regions as the bottom shows you that 8% of the public seed producers cover about 60% of the market, while 49% of the private had 26% of the market, whereas 12% of the market covered by the unions. The next one, please. Since 2014, DSM has shown growth of volume of seed delivered by 5 times. I mean, from 89,000 quintals to 501 quintals, from 3% of carryover to 1% of carryover. And so on your right side tells you the disaggregate number or volume per region. Again, Oromia contributes for 60% of the seed that is channeled and marketed. Next one, please. Again, the good point of DSM that we would like to share to the government is that what is the financial contribution of DSM? I mean, if you see the chart at the bottom, last year we had 10 crops, and the seed channel to farmers was about 1.7 billion Ethiopian birr. But if you add up this for the last 6 years, it goes to 7 or more than 7 billion birr that is saved from the government's budget. I mean, normally as the conventional system, seed is delivered using the government budget. So by DSM, we showed the government that we can save this volume of budget or resource that would have been used for other purposes. Plus, as a common practice, we have between 20 to 30 or even 40% carryover. That carryover seed is entirely in this country. It is a lost seed. And it was between 345 million to 1.2 billion Ethiopian birr. Next one, please. And the service or number of smallholder farmers getting service through the DSM ranges from 474,000 in 2014 to 1.9 or 1.9 million farmers have service through DSM. On the other hand, the commission paid to agents ranged from 4 million in 2014 to 32 million Ethiopian birr. That means per agent, yes, this is a seasonal activity. Per agent, okay, you can get up to 20,000 Ethiopian birr in 2 to 3 months of service. The next one, please. We try to compare the value of DSM with the conventional system. That the first bar shows you the disaggregated volume of seed through DSM and the conventional in Oromia, Amhara, and the other 2 regions. All in all, DSM has covered about 67% of the total seed delivered in these 4 regions, while 33% is covered by the conventional marketing system. But the bottom bar again shows you how DSM was really efficient. I mean, after delivering almost 67% of the seed, we have a carryover of 1%, while the 33% of the conventional system showed a 13% carryover. The bottom bar on your right-hand side is the most interesting picture for me. One of the good value of DSM is that you can increase the consumption of seed per woreda. Nationally, we deliver 1,500 quintals of seed per woreda compared to 680 quintals of seed through the conventional system. The next one. So, what are the major achievements? I mean, in summary, yes, we can cut down the supply chain. Farmers got a better choice for variety and volume, whatever. And you have real-time supply where you can cut down the carryover. And producers were very responsible to take all actions as well as to deliver quality assured seed. And the most important, we cut down the burden of the government. And DSM has opened up the business that we see as a reliable business. So from DSM agents, I will show you later, we had good examples that from DSM agents, they have transit into the one-stop shop owners. I will show that you. And then DSM was instrumental, as Mohammed said, to develop the seed marketing directive in this country. And gradually, it was very interesting to see that regions have contributed significant amount of their budget in pushing the direct seed marketing operations. Next one. This is an example where a direct seed marketing agent can transit into a full-fledged one-stop shop. On your left side, you have agents with their small stores certified for one season. On the middle one, you can see a structure of a full-fledged one-stop shop where farmers can access all rounded inputs with services. And on the right side, you have the insides of these one-stop shops. Next one, please. So as a major challenge again, producers are still complaining about the accuracy of the seed demand they are getting from the workers. Second, the seed producers we have, the 53 seed producers, most of them are just, they are really poor. So they still demand the right capacity. Marketing agent was introduced through DSM. So we provide 2 weeks of business training, that's all. So they need really a real follow-up and good training as well as support. And on the other hand, although it is a responsibility of the seed producers to check their own material, still the external regulatory system is really weak to provide adequate service and on-time, on-spot checking of agents and the likes. Next, please. As we go forward, we have to really design the right seed producers capacity building program this country that needs. And we have to not only supporting the existing one, we have to really open up and attract new producers to come to this country, because this country is really very big and can absorb hundreds of producers in this country. Again, we have to introduce a real marketing agent development program. And at the beginning of this month, the DSM is officially transit to the government. And we had already a transitional program, but still it does not mean by doing it in one workshop, you cannot assure that DSM is a transit. So we have to really continue supporting the government in order to mainstream DSM into its regular activity. And the last one is, again, we have to have a right regulatory support so that farmers access to right quality of seed must be assured. I think that is the end, I think. That is, thank you very much.
Thank you, Itbarak. A very good presentation. I think some of the questions that were coming from the chat box were a bit addressed through your presentation. I will pick some of them and we'll come back to you. Now let's move to David McConnell, who will be presenting on the impact of DSM on access, productivity, and commercialization. Very interesting. Dr. David.
Thank you, David. I really appreciate that. Hello, everyone. Itbarak and Mohammed has given us a very interesting context in terms of the development and the regulatory changes starting from the genesis of DSM. What I want to focus on this study, on this presentation, is basically on the impact of DSM on access to seeds, yield, and commercialization. Gashaw Abata, Said Imam, Rui Benfica, David Spillman, and Frank Place are also part of this research, which is commissioned by PIM. So as I said, the focus is really impact assessment. Next slide, please, David, James. Yeah, I don't have to discuss more about the background for DSM, but since its pilot stage back in 2011, a number of studies have been done to evaluate its impact. For instance, Benson et al. 2013, they have evaluated the pilot DSM, and they found encouraging results for the government to stay the course of this the seed transformation of seed marketing. McConnell et al. 2015 also undertook a descriptive analysis of the DSM and on particularly on key seed system indicators, where they found some regional differences. In addition, there are at least 4 studies from ISSD in 2014, 2015 that explored experiences of DSM in different regions. I should also mention that there have been a series of internal assessments by the ATA. But overall, as of yet, the DSM has not been subject to an impact assessment, and that's what this study tries to fill in. Next slide, James. Thanks. So as I said, the objective is to explore the impact of DSM on first order indicators of a healthy seed system, such as availability of seed quality, and quantity of seed purchased, but also on secondary and tertiary level effects of healthy seed system, particularly changes in yield, changes in market participation, where market participation in this case is defined as changes in the share of harvest sold to the market. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the study exploits the staggered approach to scaling out of DSM over time and over space. So we have applied a quasi-experimental difference in differences approach, where we exploited, as I said, temporal differences before and after a Warada became part of DSM, as well as spatial differences between Waradas with and without DSM. Next slide, James. In terms of data, we had from ATA IFPRI surveys quite a large nationally representative data set back in 2012, just about when ATA was, DSM was being implemented, was being piloted, where so that we can use that as a baseline. And we also have second and third waves of the survey in 2016 and 2019. And for this study, we focus on maize, wheat, and teff, which are primary crops for DSM, as well as for the country's grain production. We used 2012, as I said, as a pre-DSM period for maize and wheat, but in our survey, the number of waradas was under DSM for teff were limited, particularly in our 2016 survey. So the teff analysis is limited to 2016 and 2019, where 2019 is used as a pre-DSM period. Next slide, James. So without further ado, I'll just go ahead and give you a highlight of both the descriptive and the econometric results. So descriptively, compared to non-DSM waradas, DSM is associated with higher maize yield in 2016 and 2019. It's also associated with higher seed purchased per hectare for maize and wheat in both 2016 and 2019 compared to 2012. There is also a higher share of harvest sold for wheat and maize in DSM waradas in both 2016 and 2019. But also, if you just look at other confounding factors, in DSM waradas, there are higher use of chemical fertilizers, manures, and pesticides. And on the other side, particularly for teff, we have seen lower yield in 2016 and lower share of harvest sold in 2019. Key takeaway probably here is it is difficult to just look at descriptive results. These are just associations. These are not causal results at this stage, but it could also be tricky to assign changes to a particular program. But in the next few slides, I will show you results from the difference in differences analysis, where we have more confidence in talking about causal relationships. Next slide, James. So this slide shows you the effect of direct seed marketing on crop yields. Without going to the tables, just the summary of this table shows that DSM has led to a 26% increase in maize yield, particularly in 2019 compared to 2012. But when it comes to wheat and teff, we haven't seen that statistically significant impact on yields of wheat and teff. The signs are positive. Descriptively, the yields are higher in DSM woredas, but they are not statistically significant. So that 26% increase in maize yield is really high. Next slide, please. The other outcome indicator we looked at is commercialization, where, as I said, commercialization is defined as a share of harvest sold to markets. And we have seen that for maize, again, DSM has led to almost 5 percentage point increase in the share of maize harvest people sell to the market in 2019 compared to 2012. Here as well, there are differences across crops because we don't see statistically significant results on wheat and teff. DSM's impact on commercialization of wheat and teff. Next slide, please. Overall, though, on other, particularly first order level effects of seed system or seed marketing, we have seen that the difference in difference analysis also shows that DSM led to improved seed availability for all the three crops, maize, wheat, and teff, in 2019 compared to 2012. Particularly for wheat, we have seen that DSM has led to about 28 kilograms increase in wheat seed purchased per hectare compared to 2012. On the other side, though, we haven't found significant effects or statistically significant effects on the impact of DSM on seed quality for all the three crops and the quantity purchased per hectare for maize and teff. These are important because in the first place, it is telling us what's happening to these first order effects of the policy change. But it's also important, these results are also important to understand the mechanisms through which changes in seed availability, changes in seed purchase are going to translate into increased yield and commercialization. Next slide, please. So we are thinking, by the way, this study is really fresh and we are still working on it. So we are trying now to understand why do we see DSM's yield impact and also its impact on extension limited to maize as opposed to wheat and teff. The first hypothesis we have probably has to do with Ethiopia's relatively matured experience with DSM for maize compared to say wheat and teff, providing suppliers enough time to put in place their own marketing channels and their own logistics to get this right. The figure on the left shows number of DSM woredas over time, and you can see that the experience with maize is much earlier. The figure on the right also shows quantity of seeds sold under DSM. And even though we have seen a kind of steady increase for maize in terms of amount of seeds sold under the program, for wheat, it's really late. It's only around 2018, as we have seen from the previous studies, 28 presentations. 2018 and 2019 is when actually the increase in wheat kicks in. So that relative differences in experience across crops could be one of the story. Next slide, please, David, James. So the second hypothesis we have has to do particularly with the type of varieties for maize versus wheat and teff. More than 90% of maize seeds supplied under DSM are hybrid. most, if not all, of wheat and teff varieties are openly pollinated varieties. And as you all know, hybrid seeds provide that financial incentive for seed suppliers to be agile enough to respond immediately to increased demand. And it can also influence how fast suppliers establish their marketing channels, their logistics, and so on to meet increased demand. A point related to this is something that we are trying to look into is perhaps the yield response for purchased seeds compared to saved seeds is relatively smaller for openly pollinated varieties than hybrid seeds, particularly within a short time frame, given that OPVs can be reused and saved without losing too much of their vigor for a few years at least. So probably the story could be different if we have a relatively longer panel after the 2018 injection of wheat under DSM, because our latest data is right in 2019. Next slide, James. Yeah, but also just before going to the conclusions, these are not the only explanations, and we are looking into other hypotheses as well that we are currently working on. For instance, we need to look into the varieties. Increased, yield is just one aspect or one outcome. Perhaps some of the varieties are disease resistant. Perhaps some of the varieties are drought resistant, and it may not just be fair to just look at yield and analyze the result. So we are looking at other explanations as well at this stage. Overall, though, we have found that the DSM has shown highly encouraging results. That includes a 26% increase in maize yield and about 5% increase in the share of maize harvest sold to market. In addition, DSM has improved seed availability for maize, for wheat, and for teff, and it has also led to a 28 kilograms increase in wheat seed purchased per hectare. On the other hand, though, insignificant impacts have been seen of DSM on yield and commercialization of wheat and teff. In addition, insignificant impacts of DSM on seed quality. So overall, the results call for a crop-specific review of the performance of DSM, focusing on particularly on OPVs and also on the immediate years after the crop is covered under DSM. Thank you, everyone, for your participation.
Thank you, David. I think we are in time now. We will proceed to the key questions that have been forwarded in the chat boxes. So let me start from the first one, which is related with the mechanism or the procedures and practices that have been used to convince the government to change the policy, which I forward to Mohammed, which was raised by Tom. Mohammed, can you give a reflection? How we managed to convince government to accept DSM as a policy change?
Okay, just I don't know if I get clearly what you have said, but yes, the government, the way, there are two things. One is from the very beginning, since 2011, there is no objection against DSM in terms of its benefit to farmers. That's one critical point. So at all levels, there is no objection about that. But the problem is related to the sometimes in terms of ideology, or sometimes in terms of the perception that this is not in line with how the government thinks. It's not in line with the policy of the government. That's where we have the problem than the actual benefit of the DSM. So while while there is this push in terms of, when there is a push in terms of number of districts covered by DSM, we are indirectly pushing the government to accept it. That's what we have done from the bottom. So for farmers and even lower level government structure, there is a high demand from that side. So the second level is about convincing the higher political people at high level to change the way they understand the problem of seed distribution. They understood it, but the problem is that they often link that to the policy. And sometimes it's not the written policy, but it's unwritten policy. That's also the major problem. So they try to not accept it objectively, but subjectively in terms of that it is not in line with how the government is planning. Because there is also interest, both individual and group interest. Because in the group interest, we can see that the government can easily manage planning and implementation of activities. That's what they always sometimes argue. If we leave it for the companies may not able to supply what we want. So we have tried to show that the companies can do it. Companies can supply it. So, but at the end, because of the change in political system, somehow political system in 2018, then they give ear to us to listen and they have accepted our idea. That's how we have tried to use the opportunities that emerge so that we change the policy. That's how we have used.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mohammed. Maybe a little bit linked to what you said is I see some questions raised in terms of how DSM has been implemented initially and what has been revised later on in terms of its implementation. Maybe this is directed to Dr. Itbarak, how it was initially implemented and then what was modified. And it will be good that you associate this with the system which we call it conventional. Dr. Itbarak.
Right. I mean, first let me add up with what Mohammed said. I mean, normally in this country, where specifically to DSM, it was implemented by the regions by themselves, and the regions and even the waradas and the regions understood what is the value of DSM before the federal government understand what is the contribution of DSM. So we use these regional forces to convince the federal government to set up or to start the policy change. That's number one. Yeah. The other point is, I recall 2017 or 2000, when we started drafting the directive, there was an assumption by the federal government that DSM is only designed for hybrid maize. But DSM is just a marketing. Entirely, it is a business of channeling seed to delivering to the farmer, or entirely depends on facilitating the agentship and the like. So we said, okay, let's wait until the federal government understood, and let's try to show what is the added value of DSM compared to their conventional delivery of seed to different regions. So in 2017, I think there was about 40% of seed carryover, while DSM was demonstrating about 3% or so. So we start to win the minds and hearts of the federal government by doing the job, not just by on the paper. Thank you. Did I address?
Yes, I think, I hope so. Let's move further. There is also a question coming in related with whether DSM can serve all segments of the seed markets. I think in terms of type of farmers, agroecology, and others. can you reflect maybe?
No. I will not 100% say that the DSM will address every segment of farmers. And that's why in this country you have a number of seed producers. I mean, you have the cooperatives, you have entirely private or the publics. So this type of seed producers have their different roles, where they try to address different segment of farmers. So I'm not 100% arguing that DSM can cover everything. No, but it tells you that by opening up the marketing system, even if it's a small quantity or a bigger one, you can address the interest of farmers. That's
Mohammed, can you add on this?
Yes, just to add a bit on that. It all depends on to what extent the market is attractive for the producers. So in the case of DSM or direct seed marketing, it is whenever there is at least some economies of scale, then the producers are interested to go to that particular area. But when there is no economy of scale in the marginal areas in particular, the producers are not interested. At the same time, for the agent, it will not be paying because they are only selling a small amount of seed. So they will not be interested. And that means for some crops and for some geographical areas, the distribution system will continue and the government has to find ways of addressing that particular group of location or farmers. That is a must. It cannot be only DSM.
David, can you add on this in relation to the findings that we have seen clear impact on hybrid maize, but not that much on wheat and maize? Can we associate that it may be also linked with the market segments, the seed market segments?
Yes, I believe I agree with the type of farmers, big farmers, small farmers, economies of scale, and so on. But there is also a story based on the OPV versus hybrid one, because I think both the private and the public would have appropriate roles in seed marketing and distribution. There are quite a number of varieties, crops that are very important to the food system in Ethiopia that are not hybrid. Some of them are even neglected. So both from research and the distribution side, I think there is still a need, particularly for OPVs. Even though we have seen some improvements in wheat, but if you just look at F, for instance, even though there has some improvement, it has barely picked up. So I think there is a role for government.
Maybe in line with this, another question that came in is about the perception of farmers toward this DSM compared to the conventional. Maybe, David, you may have, from your research, you may have looked into that. What are really the perceptions of farmers by comparing with the conventional one?
Yes, so our study, our analysis on seed quality is actually based on farmers' perception. And what we have seen is in all the three crops, farmers, when you look at it descriptively, there is a positive trend of higher seed quality according to farmers' perception in DSM Waradas. But when you control for quite a number of confounding factors, even though it is positive, it is not that big and it's not statistically significant. So some things are moving, but I don't think it is that much. Partly that has to do with it is probably too much also to ask for within a short period of time for a distribution change to affect quality.
Another issue is related with what Dr. Itbarak said, that on paper, DSM approach is handed over to the Ministry of Agriculture to be a national program, following the piloting, testing by ISSD and a bit of further scaling by ATA. And now, as most of you panelists are aware, many of our participants are engaged in seed sector support in Ethiopia, but also elsewhere. And the key question is, what type of further intervention we still require to really make sure that the approach will go where it needs to go. So let me start from Itbarak.
Sorry, say it again, please. I wasn't.
Well, the question is, as you mentioned, it is now handed over to the ministry,
Yes,
to be a national program.
Yeah.
And many of our participants in this webinar are engaged in seed sector support in different ways. And they really want to know what still needs to be done in supporting the government so that it becomes real national program. What are still missing?
Well, I mean, for example, we have the seed marketing directives. These seed marketing directives completely liberalized seed marketing in this country. It doesn't matter whether you have any sort of seed, any crop type, as well as it opens up room for any type of seed marketer or dealers. But this understanding is only limited mainly at the federal, as well as a little bit of at the regional level. That means we have a lot of homework to disseminate this directive at the grassroots level. I mean, by doing, Waradas understood the value of DSM, but that must be legalized. I mean, DSM must be legalized in every corner of the Waradas. So in disseminating government's policy is #1 assignment for us. We did already, last year, we did an introduction of the seed directive to all bureau level participants, with the assumption that they can take it down to the Waradas. But in many cases, that is still limited. It is hanging at the Warad, at the federal, at the bureau level. So the next assignment will be, we have to really popularize that directive, so that we have to make that seed is a business, and seed is a commodity for business, and that directive tells directly, so that people intentionally or unintentionally try to interfere in the marketing. So that must be the next assignment. Second, at the federal level, well, we have one more commitment. I mean, the federal level, they know DSM. I would say that, okay, regions understand DSM much better than the federal level. So in order to understand, in order to sell our business at the federal level, we have one strategy. That means ATA is really committed to deploy those project staff who have been conducting DSM over the last 5-6 years, will be assigned, will be positioned in the ministry for 1 or more years, until the ministry understands the whole process of the concept and the process of DSM. That's what we have on the table.
Thank you, Tabarak. Mohammed, you want to add?
Yes, I think in addition to this policy or knowing the directives, but also when we see now what is the challenge to the seed marketing, one is the issue of the production capacity of the producers themselves. Because whenever the production decreases, the government tend to distribute the seed. So to change the marketing to distribution. So if at all there is support, the support has to go to the producers to increase the amount of seed produced. That directly forces them to directly sell the seed. That's one. Secondly, it's also the capacity and the capability of the agents down at the grassroots level, because most of the challenge, what we have faced, is the infrastructure at the village level, because you don't get storage facilities at there, and thus, for instance, in Amhara, it's only cooperative who are distributing seed, I mean, as agent, and they are not as such agent because they are serving for 2-3 companies of producing the same product. This is mainly because there is no infrastructure also, although there are also other issues. So we need to work on capacitating, giving the capacity of infrastructure capacity, as well as the production capacity for the producers. This is, I think, the areas that we need to take care so that this marketing will continue.
Thank you. David Spillman, you want to add on this?
Just generally speaking, stepping back from the Ethiopia example, I think what's important to recognize is that Ethiopia, like many other countries, historically had a seed system that was managed by the state, by the government. But unlike many countries, in Ethiopia, state management was near total. Farmers either purchased seed from the state's expansive seed system and its delivery system for fertilizer and credit, or it turned to typical informal exchange mechanisms. There's very little room for private enterprise of any magnitude, large or small. This state of affairs persisted until about 10 years ago, as Dr. Tabarek and Dr. Mohammed explained to us, when an opening appeared in the National Development Strategy for Agricultural Transformation. And it was that opening that cautiously permitted experimentation and innovation in the rollout of this, what I would call a quasi or proto-market-based channel for seed distribution. And I say quasi or proto because, as our speakers have said, I view these early experiments as experiments in a not fully liberalized market, but rather careful entries into a very contested space. And there are good reasons to do that. There are risks to handing over state control of the seed system to the market exclusively. No seed system can function effectively without an appropriate role for policies, investments, and regulations for varietal release and seed quality insurance and other aspects. So some degree of intervention in the market is always required to ensure fair exchanges between seed sellers and farmers, especially resource-poor farmers, as we have in much of Ethiopia. Farmers who essentially can't access full information about the seeds and traits they purchase. But navigating this razor of what role for the public sector and what role for the private sector is a question that's very specific to the crop and commodity in question, right? If we're talking about seed for hybrid maize, well, there's a huge role for the private sector, and to be quite frank, a very small role for the public sector. But when we're talking about teff and neglected and underutilized species of other crops, then of course the public sector may have a much larger role to play. But for Ethiopia and for many other countries, the big question is how much space is there for experimentation and innovation, which goes back to some of the points that Dr. Mohammed made, right? Yeah. And in innovating and experimenting, on top of that, how much space is there for evaluation of the kind that Dr. Dawit Makonnen presented, right? It's easy to say, we have achieved this much production, we have distributed this much material, this much seed. Those are really important monitoring indicators. But what it really comes down to is whether we have seen gains in not just adoption and yield, but also in other aspects such as marketing. Whether farmers are actually marketing greater shares of their crop into commercial value chains. And on top of that, whether any of this actually translates into income and expenditure and poverty changes for the types of people we're talking about here. So we need that space. In Ethiopia, I think, is a really interesting example of that space for experimentation, innovation, and evidence creation. I encourage more of this. I remember when we first started talking about DSM, and when ISSD and ATA were working on these topics, there really wasn't that much space. And now that's changed. Now there's a lot more space to experiment. And I encourage many participants in this webinar to think about that in their own contexts. How much wiggle room, how much experimentation room do they have to work in their own countries? On the policy front, it's just not enough to do a little pilot with a couple of villages and a couple of farmers. The question is, in the policy space, how much wiggle room or how much room is there for experimentation and innovation? Thank you.
Thank you, David. The other follow-up issue is, I think, the focus that David McConnell presented was the impact in terms of, improved access to seed, volume increase, yield increase, and so on. But on the other hand, some of our participants want to see or hear from you. It is the relation between DSM and its impact on quality, seed quality, and also whether it also is linked with varietal replacement. I think these are something that may have an impact because of DSM. Can you reflect on this? Maybe Itbarak or David? Okay, David.
No, I quickly, from our data set, we don't have variety level information, so it is a bit difficult at the household level. But we are planning to look into that at Warada level. So particularly if there are differences between the varieties distributed in DSM and non-DSM Waradas. For instance, for wheat, about 60%, I think, even in one of Itbarak's slides, these are two varieties, Ogolcha and Kingbird, I think. And are these the same varieties in non-DSM Waradas? We are trying to explore those ones at Warada level.
Okay, you want to reflect, Itbarak or Mohammed?
Well, I mean, in 2019, last year, we had that kind of data. What are the really important varieties? I mean, first of all, what are the most important crops that are marketed at this time? And the biggest figure comes from wheat and maize. It was very, very, very clear. That means DSM is a reflection of what is produced in this country. So dominantly we have wheat and maize. And as it is said by Mohammed and others, we have to really encourage producers to produce more and to diversify. In 2019, there were about 20 maize varieties marketed and 25 wheat varieties. Out of the 25 wheat varieties, 5 or 6 varieties were really the dominant marketable commodities. The rest are either fading away or they are getting older. So farmers' inclination towards the new varieties is really very, very, very interesting. So DSM is contributing in terms of introducing, bringing into new varieties of farmers. The same with maize, 5, or I think if I recall properly, 5 varieties were dominating about 92 or over 90% of the market. So the rest, I mean, still farmers are, I mean, changing towards new varieties, or they are still sticking to the most dominant varieties. There are old varieties marketed as this the market.
Okay.
So, but the point is that we are addressing the interest of farmers. I think that's what I believe. Thank you.
Yeah, let me take you back. There is one question related to the challenge of convincing policymakers to adapt direct seed marketing. But there is also a question that because the conventional seed marketing takes the whole seed marketing risk to the public, to the government, some of the seed producers are not that much interested to really invest in and engage in direct seed marketing. So do you see this as a challenge apart from convincing the policymakers? Mohammed, can you give a reflection?
Yes, I think this is what we have been experiencing. I mean, in terms of, it's not only the government that is to some extent against the change, but also the companies, some of the companies, not all, are also interested to remain in the same system of distribution, mainly because they minimize their marketing risk. Second, they also minimize their marketing cost. So there are, I mean, both government and some companies who only see the short-term gain want to stay in the distribution. That have been the problem. But as I said, we are pushing from different direction. I mean, in terms of the demand for the system change from below, and also trying to convince the policymakers to change. I mean, sometimes we use the concept that, okay, if farmers are benefited from the change, why you don't change it? So there are all those, it is difficult for both government and particularly the government to say this system is not working. But they always give you some idea, some point where they try to justify that the system is not working. Like, yeah, you see, we don't have infrastructure at the Kabali level, so this cannot work. So the government has to distribute all. So it's about just trying to justify. Otherwise, it's not about objectively justifying that seed marketing is not working. And as I said, both the government and the companies, they want to remain in the system for some time at least.
Can I add one more point?
Please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, if you recall the recent acceptance of the seed policy, I mean, DSM has contributed a lot on the drafting of the recent seed policy. Even the government is really willing to put an article on sharing the public seed enterprise into a kind of shareholding, because through DSM, okay, most of the seed producers were entirely relying on the regulatory service, the external regulatory service, so that we push to establish their internal, at least smaller, to some extent, their internal quality checking system. The other point, even including the big public enterprises, they don't have even marketing segment. They simply produce and deliver to the market, to the government, and the government was taking all the risks, and farmers are taking the final risk. So these are the DSM tries to show this is a risk sharing approach, whereby the producer has to take much of the risk, and the farmers must be really comfortable to have their demand. Thank you.
One last very important question. So far, we have focused on really, presenting the advantages and so on about DSM. And there is a question: what are really the shortcomings of DSM that you feel are, existing? Any of you?
Just let me put one idea that comes to my mind in terms of, or what we have been observing, is that probably if we push for DSM only, there are crops and varieties that will be sorted out because the producers go more for only profitable crops. Then crops like hybrid will be more important, or more will be in the market, while other crops may be forgotten. Then, which means that the problem with, if we leave everything to DSM, most producers will only go to the most high profitable crops. In that case, you need to watch the change. Particularly, the government has to make sure that the public continue to produce non-hybrid. Now, for instance, it's already a problem in Ethiopia, not because of DSM in general, but because there's about 85% of the seed is only maize and wheat. That's what we are observing. And still the government need to watch other crops also. So it's what I observed is that the DSM may, if we leave everything to the marketing, some of the crops will not be in the market in the future. So that's one thing that I observed.
Thank you, Mohammed. David, you want?
Yeah, sure. Just to quickly add, I agree with what Mohammed just said, but also DSM brings about even a stronger role of the government in facilitating competition in DSM Waradas, even for hybrid maize and wheat. there has to be some kind of enabling environment for competition to occur. It's not good to have just one or two DSM supplier in a Warada. There has to be competition if we expect this to translate into quality. But I also expect that quality assurance will become an important role for government and regulatory agencies along with the introduction of DSM.
Thank you.
And
okay. Go ahead.
yeah, I mean, one shortcoming, maybe as I said before, from the retailer side. I mean, in the same agents are operating for 2 to 3 months in a year. That means they have to have something for living, or we have to really support them, not only in terms of addressing seed, but they have to transit into addressing other agricultural inputs. You can grow from smaller volume of seed to other agricultural inputs and transit into input supplier or input retailer. So that there must be a chain of reaction from a smaller seed retailer into a bigger agricultural input marketer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
David, you want to add? Or no? I think I have a good feeling that I have addressed all the concerns that has been raised. In case I didn't really pick some of the questions from our participants, I really ask sincere excuse. Before I conclude, I would like to ask panelists if you have final words before I give back the chairmanship back to James. So any issue you want to reflect, our panelists?
If I may, just few questions that were not answered. So probably there was a suggestion on analyzing seed quality by type of suppliers, public, private, and unions. And I think that is well taken. We will do that. We haven't done that so far in a rigorous way. So we will do that. And there was a question on if there is the working paper is available for the study I presented. And please stay tuned because around the end of December, we should have a working paper for public view. Thanks.
Thank you, Dawit. Others?
No, for me, I'm fine. I just finished.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you all. I hope we had a very good discussion and overview and a bit of understanding about DSM. Still so many questions to be answered, to be looked into, and it is exciting to know that government has picked up as a national program. So a lot of opportunity, as David Spielman said, to look into and really explore how we can timely support so that, the seed marketing dimension of the whole seed system will be a bit further liberalized and based on evidences. So I really request all participants to really look into look into this issue and explore how we can really support this program, this innovation. Thank you very much. So now let me give back the chairmanship to James for his final words. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Dawit. And again, thank you to all of our speakers. It was 3 really interesting presentations, followed by a really engaging discussion. And I do believe we've answered quite a lot of the questions that came up in the chat. Thanks to our attendees for posting those questions, but I'm also happy and very grateful that I started to see some answers coming to these questions. And it's always a little bit unfortunate that we don't have the time or space, or that we're not together in the same room where we can really keep this discussion going. I would like to just quickly round off by promoting our next webinar. It is indeed webinar season, and next week we will have our last online event of the year. We're having many webinars at the moment due to the impacts of COVID-19 that we're all experiencing. Aside from that, of course, COVID-19 has had quite some implications on the functioning of seed sectors. And the different responses that we see have highlighted some real needs and opportunities for structural reform. We have some very interesting cases from Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Kenya, from some real diverse speakers. So I do hope you can all join us again next week. I just want to emphasize that if you have signed up for today, it doesn't automatically mean you've signed up for next week. So if you're interested to attend next week, and I hope you are, please do go back to the ISSD Africa website and sign up. With that, I'd also like to invite people to stay in touch and to join in this ISSD Africa network. We publish newsletters, and increasingly next year, we hope to do so regularly. And we're on Twitter. You can find us there and keep engaged with everything that the community does. With that, I would like to say thank you very much. I wish everybody a very nice morning, afternoon, evening, depending where you're calling in from, and hope to see you online again soon, and ultimately hope to see you face-to-face again soon at some point.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thanks a lot.
James.
Thank you all very much.
Bye.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks. Bye.